Okay, this lecture is called Doctors and Scientists Who Belong in the Textbooks. And what I'm basically saying here is that the conventional medical textbooks are stupid. They're a joke. They're sort of designed to make sure that doctors don't understand what's going on, what causes diseases. And that's why if you're only trained in conventional medicine, and basically, and I got 99% on med school and residency boards. Despite all that, you can't understand the basics of disease with just that education. It's a very poor, limited education. You do have a foundation, a base from which to learn very quickly, but unless you extend that, you got to study nutrition, epidemiology, and toxicology. That's where it's at, okay? And you need to know some hormonal stuff beyond what they teach you. Okay, so here, let's just real quick go through a bunch of guys and a few women who belong in the medical textbooks that are not in them. Walter Kempner, grandfather of nutrition therapy, putting people on a low-fat vegan rice diet back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s and 70s. He cured tons of patients of chronic diseases, hypertension. He often was able to stabilize chronic kidney disease, reverse type 2 diabetes, diabetic retinopathy, hypertensive retinopathy, congestive heart failure, coronary artery disease, etc., with reversal of EKGs. Nathan Pritikin did something similar to Kempner, and he was a really good researcher to go through all the papers, and he figured out all fat is bad. Okay, it's impossible to be too low in protein or too low in fat. Okay, he wrote excellent books that are very logical that explain how he came to all these conclusions. He had a lipotoxemia theory, basically fat is bad, and he correlated that to causing a lot of diseases. Okay, including sort of like what I like to call it sort of the Asian concept of hot disease, cold disease. So hot disease is an acute inflammatory phase. Cold disease is the immune system comes in and tries to turn everything off, and fibrosis the area, scarring. Well, the relevance being is it starts out inflamed, but then it becomes scarred and fibrosed, and that decreases oxygen delivery to the tissues. And then, like Otto Warburg said, you cause hypoxia, lack of oxygen to the tissues. The cell can become dysfunctional, not having enough oxygen for its mitochondria, and go into becoming a cancer. Okay, so I could have included Otto Warburg on here. Okay, mitochondrial hypoxia, causing mitochondrial injury, leading to the cell reverting to anaerobic metabolism and becoming like cancer. Okay, so that's how hot disease, cold disease, inflammation leading to fibrosis and scarring and subsequent tissue hypoxia, ischemia means lack of blood flow, can lead to cancer. Okay, Dennis Burkitt figured out abdominal pressure syndrome and a whole bunch of other things when he was in charge of epidemiology in Africa. A Christian missionary, Irish guy, did that. David Blankenhorn, researcher on atherosclerosis, came to the conclusion all fat is bad. McDougall quotes him in his books. Dean Ornish did very good research on atherosclerosis, telomeres, and prostate cancer, showing that low-fat, plant-based diets are very helpful for these conditions. Caldwell-Esselstyn, extensive research, multiple decades of follow-up, showing large-scale reversal, prevention of progression of atherosclerosis and reversal of it from eating a low-fat vegan diet. T. Colin Campbell showed that animal protein is the worst carcinogen. His book, The China Study, is a classic. Esselstyn's book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, is a classic. Let's see, John McDougall, his book, Starch Solution, is a classic. Basically, he figured out that starch-based vegan diet cures most of the Western diseases. That's the most important thing you could know in all the medicine. I've been a doctor some 34 years or so, and the most important thing I ever learned was starch-based diet cures most of the chronic Western diseases. That's all you need to know. McDougall would just tell the patient, look, eat 90% of your calories from starch, and then 5% from fruits, 5% from vegetables. Just do that. That's all you need to know. And they would get better at most diseases, okay? Not everything. There's a few other things that are good to know too, but that's the start of it. If you don't know what else to do, just do that for starters. Okay, Roy Swank figured out all this stuff about blood sludge causing tissue hypoxia and that increasing the risk of multiple sclerosis, especially SAT fat. Gregory Sloop, he's a pioneer of atherothrombosis theory, that atherosclerosis is a blood clot, and he explained mechanisms whereby LDL cholesterol sticks the red blood cells together, increasing blood viscosity, increasing its tendency to precipitate the clot, and how this would cause high blood viscosity, thick blood, leading to a loss of the Wing-Kessel effect, leading to atherosclerosis. He's a pathologist. He sees it under a microscope. Atherosclerosis is a blood clot. William Roberts, the greatest cardiac pathologist who ever lived, said the same thing. Atherosclerosis is a blood clot. And here's his big statement, though. Atherosclerosis is always diffuse. It's always diffuse throughout the coronary. So this idea of single vessel disease, just bypass this, just stent that, and then you're cured. No, not at all. It's always all over the place. So you got to do something systemic. Ideally, diet. Much far back. Second choice of that would be, all the drug stuff. Great pioneers of diabetes: Michael Brownlee, Gerald Shellman, Roy Taylor, Stephanie Seneff, also J. Shirley Sweeney you could include in there, and Hemsworth, Rabinowitz. Okay, those are all some of the pioneers of diabetes. Figuring out it's primarily due to eating high-fat diets, and it's reversible with weight loss and eating low-fat diets. Anthony J., PhD, Philippa Darbra, PhD, they figured out the role of all these estrogenic chemicals, increasing the risk of cancer, obesity, infertility, and a bunch of other diseases. Anthony J.'s book, Estrogen Generation, is one of the all-time great medical books. Randall Laufer, PhD from Harvard, he wrote a book about the role of iron overload in disease, and a couple other people wrote good books on that as well. I think Eugene Feinberg and another guy, I don't remember his name right at the moment, but yeah, you want to not be iron overloaded. Most men are after their mid-20s. Most women are after their postmenopausal, let's say by around 55 to 60. Martin Pall did the best work I've seen on EMF, and he had a really nice book on the role of let's just call it the no theory, okay? Nitric oxide and peroxynitrite roles in the role of EMF and all of that. EMF opens up calcium-gated voltage-gated calcium channels, so it'll have an excitotoxic effect on the brain. Multi-decade metastatic cancer survivors like Ruth Heydrich, PhD, Lorraine Day, MD, Janet Murray, she's the one who ran marathons around the periphery of Australia. The lady who summarized it all, Radical Remission, PhD lady, Kelly Turner. That should be in the books. People should know that it's not guaranteed, but it's worth a try. Psychiatrists like Lauren Mosher on schizophrenia, the whole Soteria experiments, Deliverance, living in residential facilities, having tremendously better results than drugs. Peter Bregan, who figured out all psych drugs cause lobotomy. Grace Jackson, who wrote essentially what he did, but she went into more detail on the pathophysiology. Thomas Schaas, he wrote that mental illness is a myth. He's a brilliant guy. Lots of good quotes from him. Alan Goldhamer and the benefits of water fasting, how he had patients reverse their lymphomas, patients dramatically lower their LP(a), for example, and other really good results. Healing Power of Faith, Harold Koenig. All the major religions, people who follow them are much healthier than people who don't. Gerald Pollack, PhD, figured out the 4 phases of water. Dean Murphy wrote a great book summarizing the studies on fluoride. John Yamamis, he's a dentist. John Yamamis, hard to say his name, PhD, did a lot of research, great on fluoride and its roles in autoimmune disease and cancer. Patrick Stortebrecker, figuring out the pathways and mechanisms of HG, causation of multiple sclerosis and other neurotoxic disorders. Murray Vimney did a lot of good work on HG toxicity and trying to prevent it. Boyd Haley did great work. He's a PhD biochemist who came up with the chelator for HG. Mercury, and can't even get it approved. It's an orphan drug now. Weston Price, he did magnificent work on a lot of things in dentistry, figuring out what causes cavities, and as well as the problems with root canals with the anaerobic toxins. Edward Carl Rosenhau, who's a Mayo Clinic bacteriologist, basically confirmed Weston Price's findings. Hal Huggins, brilliant dentist who started taking out amalgams and also root canal teeth, showing great results in patient health improvement. George Meinig, founder of the Endodontic Society for doing root canals, later turned around and said, oh my God, it's a mistake, once he discovered the research of Weston Price and Rosenau. And he wrote a book about that and taught people about it. Myself, figuring out supply and demand theory of cognitive decline, dementia, memory loss, ischemic and chemical theory of spinal degeneration, the best theory of cognitive decline, the best theory of spinal degeneration. I see it all day long, every day, explaining the mechanism of degenerative disc disease, diffuse idiopathic skeletal hyperostosis, ossification of ligamentum flavum, Bostrup's disease, and interbody fusions and weak collagen, role of mitochondria inhibitors in disease. So anyways, these are all people who sort of have fundamental major roles in understanding health and disease, and not a single one of them is in the textbooks, and most likely none of them will ever be allowed in the textbooks. So I'm rewriting the textbooks. I've already done so, but I'm going to continue to do it in a continually improved manner so that at least some books will carry the truth, that the truth shall not die. We'll keep it alive and give people a chance to get better. It's basically a differential chance of getting better. People who are willing to read and learn, there's a ton of good information. You just have to find it. You have to know how to process it and see the patterns, that there's a consistent path that shows all this stuff goes together. So anyways, and also Lorraine Day did a lot of good work too. She didn't just survive, she wrote extensively on how she survived metastatic cancer for decades. Anyways, I hope you found this helpful. Oh no, I got one more thing I got to show you. I got one more slide here. I'm just going to show you that I pretty much wrote a book with all the major books that I had read that helped me to figure all this stuff out. Because, you know, for every book that I include in this book here, I read like about, 5 more or more than that. So I put the top 50, it's really more like the top 60, and I found about 10 more since then. So that if some young person wants to figure everything out, yeah, they can watch my videos, go to Dr. McDougall's sites, go to VegSource and a few other really good health sites. But they can also crank through these books. And these are all the books that will be really high yield for finding useful health information. Because once you've gone through this, go through Pritikin's book, you'll never believe any of this moderate or high-fat stuff again once you go through Pritikin's books. And you look closely at what Kempner did. Read what Kempner wrote about his own diet, how he intentionally made the fat as low as possible, intentionally kept the protein as low as possible, intentionally kept the sodium as low as possible. Anyways, I hope you found this helpful.